What happens when a young black teenager's life-saving medicine is thrown away mid-flight not by accident, but by prejudice? At 36,000 feet, Maya's quiet journey to a new future nearly became a tragedy. Her father, a calm and resolute pediatric immunologist, never imagined that a single act of discrimination aboard an airplane could ground an entire flight and ignite a fight for justice that would shake an airline industry to its core. Who holds the power when bias and authority collide in a confined space miles above the ground? How far will one family go to reclaim dignity when faced with systemic disregard? This isn't just a story about medicine or flights, it's a story about courage, resilience, and the invisible battles fought by millions. Join us as we dive deep into Maya's journey and her father's relentless stand that changed policies, lives, and opened eyes worldwide. Will their fight for respect and recognition finally land, or will silence and prejudice keep flying high? If you believe in justice, dignity, and the power of truth, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that expose the truth behind the headlines. Now, let's begin. The hum of the airplane was steady and low, like a lullaby stitched into the cabin walls. It vibrated through the seats, the windows, the bones. For most passengers aboard Solstice Airlines, Flight 228, it was white noise, a background rhythm accompanying movies, light snoring, and the occasional clink of an ice cube. But for Dr. Elias Rhodes, it was the sound of hope, of borrowed time, of a promise he wasn't entirely sure he could keep. He sat in seat 3A of the business class cabin, legs crossed neatly, reading glasses perched at the bridge of his nose. Next to him, in 3B, his 17-year-old daughter, Camille, leaned against the window, her head tilted toward the soft light cutting through the clouds outside. Her long braids spilled across her shoulder and onto the travel pillow tucked under her cheek. One hand was loosely gripping a sketchbook on her lap pages, half filled with constellations, equations, and the fragile anatomy of neurons drawn in pencil and ink. Her other hand, Elias noticed, had started to tremble. Slightly, barely, but he saw it. He always did. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly, not wanting to wake the passenger on the other side of them. Camille blinked and turned toward him, her smile faint but warm. "Yeah, just thinking about the symposium, about everything. The lab, meeting Dr. Koenig, Seattle, Rainier." She paused. "You know, for most people, a trip like this is just a plane ride. For me, it's like boarding a spaceship. Like, maybe the next part of my life is on the other side." Elias nodded. "It is," he said, voice calm but unwavering. "And we're going to get you there." They both knew that wasn't a metaphor. Camille had chronic neuroinflammatory myopathy, a rare autoimmune disorder that attacked the nerves and muscles without warning. For 2 years, she'd battled relapses that left her unable to walk, speak clearly, even breathe without assistance. There were nights Elias had sat beside her hospital bed, reading aloud just to stay awake, afraid that if he blinked too long, she might slip into something she wouldn't come back from. But 3 months ago, a promising experimental treatment had shown stunning results, and Camille had responded. Now, she was in partial remission well enough to fly, to walk, to think about the future again. But her body was still in delicate balance. Her medication wasn't optional. It wasn't something she could skip or delay. The treatment came in the form of temperature-sensitive biologics. 4 vials suspended in a custom compounded lipid solution, designed specifically for her immune system. The vials were packed inside a gray medical-grade pouch, surrounded by gel packs, and stowed carefully inside Camille's carry-on under the seat in front of her. Elias had checked it 3 times before they left the house in Montclair. The documentation was sealed in a plastic folder inside the seat back pocket. TSA had cleared them with no issue. He had done everything right, because when it came to Camille, he couldn't afford not to. "Time for your second dose in an hour," Elias said, tapping his watch. Camille nodded, rubbing her fingers. "Yeah. I felt the muscles get twitchy around takeoff, but I'm okay. I think the pressure threw me off a bit. We'll stay ahead of it." He leaned slightly, his voice lowering. "Just remember to stay calm. If you feel anything unusual, tingling, weakness, blurred vision, tell me immediately. Don't try to push through it. I know. Dad." She smiled gently. "You don't have to go full doctor on me. Sorry. I only have 2 modes, father and physician. They're permanently entangled." Camille laughed, a soft, musical sound. For a moment, it made Elias forget the ache of tension that lived permanently at the base of his spine these days. The business-class cabin was quiet. Outside the window, the Rockies were beginning to appear in the distance, snow-capped and surreal against the pale sky. The plane was somewhere over Nebraska. 2 more hours to Seattle. 2 more hours until safety. A voice broke the stillness. "Sir, your daughter's bag needs to be fully under the seat, not halfway." Elias looked up. A flight attendant stood before them, arms crossed. Her name tag read Margot. He nudged the bag farther in with his foot. "Thank you. It's secure now." Her smile was professional. Tight. Her gaze lingered a beat too long on Camille before she moved down the aisle. Elias watched her go, something uneasy stirring in his chest. He didn't like the way she'd looked at Camille. Not curious, not concerned, suspicious. A minute later, Camille spoke, her voice low. "That was weird." Elias kept his tone neutral. "She's just doing her job." But in his gut, he wasn't sure. It was in the micro-behaviors. The way Margot had over-explained armrest rules to the elderly Vietnamese man across the aisle. The way she'd smiled too tightly at the Hispanic couple struggling to settle their infant. The way her tone changed depending on who she was addressing. Maybe it was nothing. But Elias had lived long enough as a black man, a father, and a physician to know that maybe was often a luxury he couldn't afford. He glanced again at Camille's bag, then at her hands. Still trembling, they needed to stay on schedule. "Would you like me to ask for some water now?" Elias asked gently. Camille nodded. "Yeah, if that's okay, I'll handle it." He reached up to press the call button. Margot returned less than a minute later, her expression already irritated. "Yes, my daughter needs to take her medication soon. May we please have a cup of water?" Her eyes dropped to Camille, then to the bag, then back to Elias. "All passengers will be served in order. Beverage service is starting soon." "I understand," Elias replied, still calm. "This is a time-sensitive medical situation. I can show you the documentation, if necessary." Margot sighed. "Fine." She returned with a plastic cup, half full, sloshing slightly as she handed it off. "Here." Elias took it with a nod. "Thank you." Camille opened the top zipper of her carry-on. She reached in and carefully lifted out the gray pouch, placing it gently on her lap. The moment the pouch appeared, Margot, who had only moved a few rows away, turned back. And something in her eyes changed, as if a switch had been flipped. "What is that?" she asked. Loud enough for heads to turn. Camille froze. Elias sat up straighter, his protective instincts sharpening. "It's her prescribed medication," he said evenly. We have the documentation available if you'd like to see it. But Margot wasn't listening. She was already stepping back toward them, her gaze fixed on the pouch like it was something dangerous. Camille clutched it a little tighter. Elias exhaled slowly, centering himself. The plane kept humming. But something had shifted. The promise he'd made to his daughter, "I'll get you there," suddenly felt much harder to keep. The pouch never left Camille's lap. She held it like it was sacred, like it held the very breath she needed to stay in this world. Her fingers trembled slightly, not just from the early signals of neurological strain, but from the unexpected jolt of being challenged. "Again, Miss, I need to see that bag," Margot said. Her voice was sharp now, clipped like the snap of a rubber band. She didn't crouch or approach with the empathy one might expect when discussing a passenger's medical condition. She stood stiff, arms folded, looking down at Camille like she was hiding something dangerous. Elias gently set his hand on Camille's arm. "She doesn't need to hand it to you," he said with practiced calm. "It contains her immunotherapy medication. It's sealed and clearly labeled. I have all the paperwork you might need. TSA cleared it. We have doctor's notes, prescriptions, and transport guidelines from the manufacturer. You're welcome to review it." Margot didn't respond immediately. Her jaw moved slightly, as if she were grinding her back teeth. Then she reached up to her earpiece and turned slightly, whispering something into her mic. Camille clutched the pouch tighter. Elias could feel her breath start to change shallow. "Quick! Camille, look at me," he said softly. She turned to him. "You're okay. You've done nothing wrong. Just keep breathing with me." From behind, another passenger shifted in their seat. Margot cleared her throat and returned her attention. "Sir, I'm going to have to take that bag to the back for inspection." "No, you will not," Elias said, his voice still calm but now unmistakably firm. "That medication must remain with her, at a stable temperature, and it cannot be shaken or opened. Any disturbance could compromise its effectiveness. Again, you're welcome to verify the documents, but the bag stays with my daughter." Margot's expression darkened. "Sir, I'm not going to argue with you. The airline has full authority to inspect any items in the cabin for security reasons." "And I'm not arguing," Elias replied. "I'm informing you this is a matter of medical necessity. You are not trained to handle biologics. Mishandling it could result in an emergency midair." A tense silence stretched in the cabin. Passengers were watching now, subtle glances and curious looks. A man in 4D pulled out his phone, pretending to text, but his camera was recording. Margot turned abruptly. "I'll be back with a supervisor." She disappeared up the aisle. Elias sighed, leaned back, and looked at Camille, who was trying very hard not to cry. "Why does this keep happening?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away, because what could he say? That it wasn't the first time someone had assumed the worst about them, that on the last trip, a TSA agent pulled Camille's scarf aside without warning, as if a head covering was a threat, that the week before, Elias himself had been stopped at the entrance of the hospital where he worked and asked to show ID twice, because the guard didn't believe a black man in a hoodie could be a neurologist. "I'm sorry," he said instead. "You shouldn't have to be this brave. But you are." She wiped her eyes. "I don't want to be brave. I just want to be treated normal." A few rows ahead, a young woman turned in her seat. She had soft black hair, a warm caramel skin tone, and oversized white headphones slung around her neck. She made brief eye contact with Camille and gave a subtle nod. Support, solidarity. She held up her phone. Showed. It was recording. Camille gave a tiny nod back. The girl turned around. A few minutes passed. Then Margot returned, this time with a tall man in a gray uniform and epaulets. Captain Ross Heller. He wasn't smiling. "Good afternoon," he said curtly. "I'm told there's a situation involving a carry-on medical kit. May I ask what's going on?" Elias stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence filled the aisle without intimidation. "My daughter is traveling with prescription medication that is essential to her health. It's properly packed, approved by TSA, and accompanied by all necessary documentation. Your flight attendant attempted to confiscate it without cause, which could have endangered her life." The captain looked at Margot, who said. He became confrontational. Elias did not flinch. I stated facts. He said, "I used no threats, no aggressive language. I'm a physician, and I explained the nature of the medication and why it must remain with my daughter. If that's considered confrontational, perhaps the issue is not with my tone, but with your policies." Captain Heller looked between them. Then, surprisingly, he crouched down slightly to speak to Camille. "What's your name?" "Young lady Camille Rhodes," she answered, voice measured. "Camille," he said, "do you mind if we take the medication to the back, just for a moment, to make sure everything's okay?" Elias stepped in. "She is a minor. She does not consent. And I do not consent. You do not have proper refrigeration or protocol to handle immunosuppressant biologics. If you remove that pouch, you risk degrading the compound. If my daughter has a relapse on this flight because of improper handling, you'll be making an emergency medical diversion anyway, except by then. It may be too late." Heller straightened. "We'll be contacting ground control to report this," he said. Elias didn't blink. "Good. Please do." Margot opened her mouth, but the captain gave her a look that said not now. He turned and left. Margot lingered a second longer, gave Camille a cold look, then followed. Camille sat back in her seat and exhaled. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm scared." He reached over and gently took her hand. "I am too," he said, "but we'll be okay. You've got your dose coming up, right? Let's focus on that. Breathe. In and out." She nodded. The girl with headphones, Joelle, according to the tag on her laptop, slipped Elias a folded note as she walked past toward the restroom. It read, "I saw everything. Recording since the first interaction. I'm a law student. Let me know if you need witness footage. No one's deleting this." Elias looked up, caught her glance, and gave a nod of gratitude. 20 minutes passed. Then, just as Camille was prepping her second dose with gloves, water, alcohol wipes, and extreme care, Margot returned. She wasn't alone. A junior flight attendant stood behind her, holding a plastic trash bag. Margot pointed to the pouch. "I need that bag now. It has been deemed non-compliant. We're disposing of it under airline security policy." Camille gasped. "No," Elias said. "Absolutely not." But Margot reached forward. Before Elias could stand again, she snatched the pouch from Camille's hands. The entire cabin froze. Passengers turned. One or two began filming openly now. Camille cried out, "Wait, please. That's my medicine." But Margot ignored her. She tossed the sealed pouch into the trash bag and walked away. Elias stood motionless for a second. Then he pressed the call button, and then another, and another. He walked straight to the cockpit door and knocked, calmly, but with purpose. When the captain answered, Elias met his eyes. "Sir," he said, "I am informing you now. My daughter has a medical emergency that has just been caused by your crew's negligence. You must divert this plane immediately." The knock on the cockpit door was soft, deliberate, more a signal of consequence than confrontation. Captain Ross Heller opened it just a crack, as per regulation, cautious eyes meeting Elias's steady gaze. "My daughter needs immediate medical assistance," Elias said, his tone low, calm, and weighted with urgency. "Your lead flight attendant has just thrown away her temperature-sensitive medication. If this flight continues as planned, you risk losing a child mid-air. I am a licensed neurologist, and I will not stand by as this unfolds. Divert. Now." Heller didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over Elias's shoulder and spotted Margot Lively hovering near the galley, arms crossed, trying to look composed. "What medication?" he asked. Elias reached into his breast pocket and handed over a laminated medical summary, Camille's official transport letter. Dosage requirements, refrigeration limits, and FDA handling instructions, all signed by Rainier Institute and 2 attending physicians. Heller scanned the document. The drug must be administered every 6 hours. If compromised, what's the risk? Seizure, fever, loss of muscle control, possibly respiratory paralysis, Elias said. Heller's posture stiffened. His pilot training told him something he didn't want to admit out loud. This was enough to initiate a medical diversion, enough to make headlines, enough to cost someone their job. "Give me 5 minutes," Heller muttered. Elias gave a single nod and returned to his seat. Camille was curled against the window, visibly shaking. He gently took her pulse, elevated, pupils slow to contract, her breath shallow, panicked. He whispered a calming mantra into her ear, the same one he'd used since she was 10 and first diagnosed. "We are not what they see. We are more. We are made of rhythm and reason. Hold steady. I've got you." Camille blinked fast. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Did he believe you?" "He's deciding," Elias said. "I can feel it starting," she whispered. "My jaw. It's getting tight. He knew the signs. Tonic rigidity, early onset. Her body was starting to respond to the absence of the compound fast." Meanwhile, in row 12, Joelle Lynn sat upright in her seat, earbuds removed. Her phone was still recording. She'd already sent the clip of Margot tossing the pouch into a private group chat of law students at NYU. Responses were blowing up: unlawful seizure, HIPAA violation, medical endangerment. This is actionable. She looked toward Camille. Their eyes met again. Joelle nodded once more. Camille tried to nod back, but her neck stiffened involuntarily. A flicker of fear crossed her face. Back in the galley, Margot was speaking in hushed tones to the junior attendant, trying to reassert authority. She'd spent 18 years in this job, watched policies rise and fall with headlines, but she had never felt this, exposed. Something about that man, that girl, the camera phones that made her skin crawl. "I followed protocol," she hissed. "It wasn't labeled clearly. They were confrontational. This is still my cabin." But even as she said it, she saw the shift. The way her junior colleague no longer nodded with full confidence. The way the passengers had stopped pretending not to listen. The way the aircraft, once quietly humming with small talk, had fallen into tense silence. Back at the cockpit, Heller spoke with air control. "Captain Heller of Solstice Flight 228, requesting immediate diversion authorization. We have a minor onboard in emergent medical distress due to mishandling of required medication. Nearest airport with emergency response team." A pause crackled through the radio. "Then roger that. Captain, redirect to Salt Lake Gateway. Weather clear, emergency team ready. You are approved for diversion." Heller exhaled. Understood. Changing heading now. The announcement came seconds later. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Due to an onboard medical situation requiring urgent attention, we will be diverting to Salt Lake Gateway Airport. Estimated time to landing 38 minutes. Please remain calm and seated. Thank you for your understanding. The tension broke like glass. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers whispered. Heads turned. Several phones tilted into place to record more openly. The buzz of social media had begun to spread like wildfire through Wi-Fi-enabled devices. Hashtags were already being typed. Camille on Flight 28. Solstice Diversion. Protect Black Children. Margot's eyes went wide. She stormed down the aisle toward Elias. "What have you done?" she hissed. Elias turned slowly, gently adjusting Camille's body as she leaned further into him, her breathing raspy now. "What I had to," he said, "to protect my daughter. You manipulated the captain into diverting the entire flight. This is going to ruin people's schedules. Our route quota." Elias stood. The shift in energy was sudden. He wasn't loud. He didn't make a scene. But something in his voice carried a truth too heavy to ignore. "My daughter is not an inconvenience," he said. "She is not an obstacle. She is not a threat. She is a person, a child. You looked at her and saw suspicion instead of vulnerability. You took something from her without knowledge or care. And now she's deteriorating at 35,000 feet. Whatever disruption you're facing right now pales in comparison to what my family has already endured today." Margot stepped back, the words clinging to her like smoke. "Excuse me," said a new voice. A man in a beige sweater and glasses stood from 3C. "I'm a pediatric oncologist. I'd be happy to assist if needed. I don't specialize in Camille's condition, but I'm trained in emergency interventions." Elias nodded. "Thank you. Please sit nearby." More passengers began volunteering. A nurse from row 9, a woman who'd been a medical supply logistics officer in the Air Force, a retired paramedic. The community had shifted. The plane had shifted. And Margot felt it. Suddenly, she wasn't the voice of authority anymore. She was just a woman who made a devastating mistake, and everyone saw it now. Camille slumped further. "Dad, it's getting harder." "I know," he whispered, rubbing her arms. "We're almost there." Elias looked to the nurse, who handed him an emergency oxygen mask from the overhead compartment. He fitted it gently over Camille's face. Deep breaths. "Love, I've got you." Joelle moved closer and crouched in the aisle. Would she like some music? Something calming? She asked, offering one earbud. Camille blinked in approval. Joelle slipped it in. A soft lo-fi beat hummed through. Camille's body relaxed just slightly. The light outside the window began to shift. The descent had begun. Elias whispered, "Hold on a little longer. Just a little longer." The wheels of Flight 228 screeched against the Salt Lake runway, with a jolt that rattled the overhead bins and hushed the last nervous whispers among the passengers. For a moment, there was only silence. A collective breath held tight inside a silver tube that had carried fear, conflict, and courage. 36,000 feet above the world. Then the engines reversed, the brakes engaged, and the cabin exhaled. Camille, limp in her father's arms, let out a trembling sound, part sigh, part sob. Her lips were pale, but her eyes remained open, searching for a horizon that wasn't there. The oxygen mask trembled against her skin as she struggled to focus. "Doctor..." Elias Rhodes kept his voice steady, but his hands were a fraction tighter than before. His chest constricted under the weight of helplessness. "We're here, baby." "Just hold on," he whispered. The moment the plane came to a full stop, the emergency doors were disarmed, and a team of EMTs boarded with efficient, calm authority. A lead medic, a tall woman with braids tucked beneath a navy cap, moved toward Camille and knelt. "Dr. Rhodes?" she asked. "Yes," Elias replied. "Her name is Camille. 17. She has a rare neurovascular disorder, Gennetti syndrome. She's been off her medication for over 5 hours. It was destroyed mid-flight." The medic glanced at Camille, then at the oxygen mask, then nodded once. "We've got a cold pack ready in the ambulance. She's stable for now. We'll get her on fluids, oxygen support, and monitor her vitals en route." As they loaded Camille onto the stretcher, Joelle reached out and gently squeezed her hand. Camille managed the smallest smile. "I'll make sure people know the truth," Joelle whispered. "You're not invisible." Camille's lips parted, but no words came, only gratitude and the weight of her eyes. As the EMTs wheeled her out, Elias followed without hesitation, but not before glancing back down the aisle. His gaze met Margot's. There was no fury in his expression, only something heavier, disappointment, finality, an absence of words that said everything. Margot didn't speak. Her hands were folded so tightly, her knuckles were white. Outside, the ambulance pulled away with a low wail that disappeared into the morning haze. Elias sat beside Camille, watching the saline drip tick down, watching his daughter breathe in short, uncertain intervals. Inside the terminal, Solstice Airlines moved quickly to control the narrative. A customer experience officer named Gerald Ashby arrived within 15 minutes, greeting the remaining passengers at the gate with cool professionalism and scripted sympathy. "We apologize for the unexpected diversion. You will each receive food vouchers and hotel accommodations if needed. Our priority, as always, is passenger safety." The word safety hung in the air like a challenge. Malcolm Everett. The lawyer from row 7 raised an eyebrow. Is that why a licensed physician had to beg for a diversion to save his own daughter's life? He asked. Ashby faltered. "I'm not authorized to speak to the medical specifics," he said, "but I assure you, Solstice Airlines takes all complaints seriously and will investigate the matter thoroughly." Joelle stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Would you like to comment on this?" she asked, hitting play. The video showed Margot throwing Camille's medication bag into the trash. A gas spread through the waiting area like a dropped glass of water. Ashby cleared his throat. "That footage will need to be verified." "It's already online," Joelle replied. "Twitter, TikTok, and a statement's been sent to several media outlets. You might want to do better than a voucher." Ashby paled, back at St. Aurora Medical Center. Elias paced the hallway outside Camille's room. She was sleeping now, IV fluid steady, oxygen levels rising. A nurse had told him the doctors were optimistic. Another hour and the worst might be behind them. Still, he couldn't stop the loop playing in his mind the moment Margot's hand had closed around the pouch. The way she hadn't hesitated, a quiet fury rose again. He thought about how many times he'd walked the world as both visible and erased. The black doctor who'd been mistaken for a porter. The father assumed to be babysitting. The patient questioned twice as hard. The man expected to stay silent to avoid being difficult. He had swallowed it. For years. But not this time. Not when it was Camille. A soft knock pulled him out of thought. Marina, his wife, had just arrived from New Jersey. Her face was drawn from travel and worry, but her arms were strong as they wrapped around him. "She's okay?" Marina asked. Elias nodded into her shoulder. "Now she is." "They said the airline tried to call us," she murmured. "They're trying to get ahead of this." The story's already spreading. Marina pulled back. We're not going to let this get buried. No, Elias said. We're not. Later that afternoon, a quiet meeting was held in a private conference room at the hospital. Present were Elias, Marina, Joelle by video call, Malcolm Everett, and a patient advocacy coordinator from the hospital named Dr. Carla Shevlin. Joelle had compiled the videos and posts that had gone viral, dozens of them, across platforms, with hashtags now trending globally: Camille Rhodes, Solstice Scandal, Disability Justice. In the sky, Malcolm tapped a stack of papers. We have enough for a formal complaint, and possibly more. Violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, negligence, emotional distress, medical endangerment. And if the FAA gets involved, Dr. Shevlin added, this isn't just about your daughter. I've seen this happen before. To children with autism, passengers with epilepsy, people of color with invisible conditions. The pattern is there. It's just been quiet. Not anymore, Marina said. Elias was quiet for a moment, his hands folded in front of him. Then he spoke. This isn't revenge. I don't want this to be a takedown for the sake of spectacle. I want change, real change, training, standards, protocols that put humanity before suspicion. Dr. Shevlin nodded. Then we'll help you build it. Let this be the case that sets the precedent, Joelle added, and I'll make sure the world sees it for what it is. That night, Camille woke with a weak voice and clear eyes. Did we land? She whispered. We did, Elias said, brushing her curls back. Am I in trouble? Elias laughed softly. You're the reason we landed safely. If anyone deserves an award, it's you. Camille blinked slowly. She didn't even look at me, like I was a problem before I even said anything. Elias held her hand. People who can't see your worth don't get to decide your value. A tear slipped down Camille's cheek. Then let's make sure no one else gets treated like that again. And in that quiet hospital room, a father and daughter made a silent promise. To speak when others are silent. To protect what must be seen. To begin a ripple that might one day become a wave. At Sikking-Thrupo, M. Sunlight leaked through the blinds of room 328 at St. Aurora Medical Center, spilling across Camille Rhodes's bed. Her curls lay soft against the pillow, her breath steadier now, the oxygen mask removed but resting nearby just in case. Machines murmured with soft beeps, and the IV line hummed with a quiet rhythm that somehow gave the room a pulse of its own. She turned her head slowly toward the window, catching the subtle silhouette of snowy Utah mountains beyond the glass. The world looked still, like it was holding its breath with her. In the chair beside her, Dr. Elias Rhodes sat unmoving, his fingers loosely folded, but his eyes tired. Not the tired that sleep cures, but the tired that comes from years of being underestimated, questioned, and now, seeing it directed at his daughter. She stirred, and his attention sharpened. Morning, he said gently. Camille blinked a few times. Still Utah. Still Utah. Did any of it matter? It mattered. He said, It matters more than you know. She studied his face for a moment. You look like you haven't slept. He smiled, small and sad. I didn't want to. Why? Because I'm afraid if I close my eyes, I'll miss something important, like you waking up, or the world finally listening. Camille let the silence settle between them. Then she whispered, She never said my name. Elias blinked. What, Margot? The flight attendant? She never asked, never called me anything. Just said her or the girl. Like I was a problem, a disruption, a liability. Elias's heart twisted. He had replayed the moment Margot discarded the medicine dozens of times, but hearing Camille name that absence hit deeper than he expected. "She didn't deserve your name," he said finally. Camille turned her face back to the window. "But I did." Later that morning, the hospital hallway echoed with the quiet footsteps of Marina Rhodes. Her suit jacket was wrinkled, her eyes shadowed, but there was something firm in her stride. She carried her strength like armor. In her hands were a few printed-out news stories, headlines from major outlets: "Teen Girls Medical Emergency Forces Emergency Landing." "Father Says Airline Erased Her Humanity." "Disability Rights Ignored at 36,000 Feet, Who Protects Passengers Like Camille Rhodes." Viral video shows flight attendant disposing of life-saving medication. "Solstice Airlines Under Fire." She handed them silently to Elias. "It's everywhere," she said. He scanned the front page of one, then another. Joelle's name was listed as the video's original source. There were quotes from Malcolm Everett, mentions of Camille's diagnosis, a timeline of events that started boarding at Briarwick International and ended with flashing ambulance lights on the Salt Lake tarmac. But what struck him most were the comments underneath, from strangers, from parents, from people who had lived something similar but never spoke up. "She looked like my daughter. That could have been us. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. My autistic son was once treated like a security threat because he flapped his hands in a terminal." Elias turned to Marina. "We can't let this fade into just another headline." She nodded. "That's why I made a call. To who? Senator Gina Mathers, Disability Rights Subcommittee. She's been working on reform bills tied to air travel accessibility. She wants to talk. You think she'll help? I think she'll listen. At Solstice Airlines headquarters." The mood was different, tense, controlled. Margot Lively sat alone in a small HR conference room, staring down at the printed complaint laid in front of her. Across from her, two executives in suits conferred in hushed tones. One of them, a sharp-jawed man named Nicholas Vane. Head of Customer Compliance, cleared his throat. "Ms. Lively," he began, "we've reviewed the footage. There's little ambiguity." She looked up. Her eyes weren't defiant. They were tired, as if something inside her had cracked, but she couldn't quite find where. "I didn't mean to hurt the girl," she said. I thought the bag could be suspicious. It wasn't labeled. It was left unattended." "We're told to err on the side of caution." Nicholas held her gaze. "You never asked. You never followed protocol. You bypassed the steps meant to protect exactly that kind of misinterpretation. I was scared. Of her or of being wrong." Margot didn't answer. Nicholas's voice softened, but it didn't waver. "You made a decision that endangered a child's life, and the company will take full responsibility. But so must you." Margot closed her eyes. Back in Utah, Camille was finally strong enough to sit up. Joelle came by with her laptop, camera bag slung over her shoulder. "I've been getting messages from parents all over the country," she said. One mom said her son refuses to fly anymore because TSA once accused him of faking seizures. Camille frowned. "It's not just me." "No, it never was." Joelle sat on the edge of the bed. "What do you want people to know?" she asked. "Not what happened, but what they should feel." Camille stared at the ceiling for a long time before she replied. "I want them to know that people like me, we don't want pity. We want awareness. I don't want to be the girl who almost died on a plane. I want to be the girl who helped change how people are seen." Joelle nodded, then hit record. "Say it again." I want to be the girl who helped change how people are seen. And in that moment, the video wasn't about the trauma. It was about transformation. That same evening, Elias stepped outside the hospital for the first time since the flight. The air was cold, but fresh, quiet. A man approached him near the parking structure, mid-50s, black wool coat, confident walk. "You're Dr. Rhodes?" he asked. I'm Malcolm Everett. I was on your flight." Elias extended his hand. "I saw what you did. The way you spoke to the captain.
The way you held your daughter. That wasn't just a father. That was a man who carried generations of restraint and said, 'Not today.'" Elias swallowed hard. "I appreciate that. I'm a civil rights attorney. If you're ready to hold them accountable, really accountable, I'd like to help."
Elias hesitated, then looked up at the winter stars. "Let's do it." Inside Camille's hospital room, Joelle was uploading the interview. It would go live in 30 minutes. The caption was already typed. Her name was Camille. What the airlines forgot. She reminded us all. The waiting area at Gate 14 in Briarwick International didn't look like the start of a storm. It looked ordinary. A toddler was chasing his juice box under a row of seats. An older couple compared cruise photos on their tablet. Business travelers scrolled silently on their phones. But just off to the left, seated beside a tall window, sat a woman who noticed everything. Her name was Nadine Ross. She was Solstice Airlines Director of Diversity Compliance, and she had just watched the viral video for the 7th time. She didn't flinch at the sight of Margot Lively tossing a black medication pouch into a trash bin. She didn't blink when she saw the panicked teenager collapse mid-flight, but her lips pressed together when the captain walked past Dr. Elias Rhodes without acknowledgement, even as the man yelled for medical help. That silence, Nadine knew, had a name. Erasure. A soft chime rang out overhead, breaking her thoughts. "Attention, all Solstice Airlines staff. Emergency HR briefing in Conference Room B begins in 10 minutes. Nadine stood, smoothing her navy skirt suit, and walked briskly through the terminal. Inside the conference room, the mood was brittle. Nicholas Vane, head of customer compliance, stood at the front with a stiff jaw. Behind him, a slideshow displayed headlines, each more damning than the last. "Let's not pretend we don't know why we're here," he began. What happened on Flight 732 was not a one-off mistake. It was a systemic failure, and it will cost us dearly. Nadine stepped forward. "It already has," she said evenly. "The question is, what are we going to do that actually means something?" One of the legal staff spoke up. "We're already prepping a settlement offer for the Rhodes family. That should contain the fallout." Nadine turned slowly. "This isn't fallout. This is a reckoning. A black teenage girl almost died at 36,000 feet because someone saw her as a threat before they saw her as a human. And now the world is watching how we respond." Nicholas glanced at her, uneasy. "And you propose a direct in-person apology, full public acknowledgement, not just policy updates, but internal education that's mandatory starting at the top. And I want a permanent committee formed to prevent this from happening again. Include people with chronic illness, neurodivergence, disability, and racial advocacy." The room was quiet. Then Nicholas said, "You're asking us to admit fault. I'm asking us to stop pretending we haven't already." Back at St. Aurora Medical, Camille scrolled through comments on Joelle's video. She didn't expect to feel what she felt. It wasn't just support, it was fury. People were angry, not just on her behalf, but on behalf of everyone who had been dismissed, doubted, or denied humanity at the hands of unchecked authority. There was a comment from a teacher in Texas. My student was removed from a school trip because his insulin alarm beeped too loud. They said it was disruptive to the environment. What's disruptive is cruelty in a uniform. There was another from a nurse in Detroit. We're trained to ask before assuming. How are flight attendants not? Camille handed the phone to her dad. They're not mad at me. They're mad with me. Elias nodded slowly. There's a difference. And it matters. Later that afternoon, Camille sat alone for the first time since the flight. She looked at her reflection in the window. Her face looked older than it had a week ago. She thought about how Margot never said her name. Then she thought about the moment she woke up in the hospital, and her dad was whispering it over and over like a prayer. Camille, Camille, Camille. She whispered it now, just once, to the glass, in the Solstice Airlines headquarters. Nicholas Vane watched Nadine from across the long table. I'll authorize the committee, he said, but only if we can keep it internal. Nadine raised an eyebrow. You don't contain moral failure with secrecy. Nicholas, you confront it. He looked away. That night, at home, Nadine stared at a photo on her wall. Her daughter, age 9, holding a nebulizer after an asthma attack. She remembered the time a hotel staff member told them to use the back entrance because the child looked unwell. She remembered saying nothing. Not again. She picked up her phone and typed, To the Rhodes family, I cannot undo what was done, but I can ensure your daughter's name lives in the systems that once failed to say it. I'm ready to meet you. I hope you'll let me. At the hospital, Camille received the message just before bed. She showed it to Elias. She's the first person from the airline to speak directly to me. Camille said, To name me. Elias read the message again. Then he nodded. We'll meet her, but not as victims, as change makers. 2 days later, in a private room at the Salt Lake Gateway Airport, Nadine, Elias, Marina, and Camille sat at a table together. No cameras, no lawyers, just truth. I watched the footage, Nadine began, and I need you to know, Camille, I need you to know your presence on that flight should have never been treated as a threat. Camille held her gaze. But it was. Nadine nodded. Yes. And that's the reality we have to face. There was a long pause. Then Marina said, So what are you offering? Not hush money? Not silence. A collaboration. With you. To create the Rhodes Resolution, a permanent policy embedded into every Solstice flight manual, every training module, every airport protocol. You'll co-author it with us, if you'll say yes. Camille looked down at her hands. For a moment, she thought about saying no, letting them twist in their guilt, but then she remembered the thousands of comments, the children who couldn't speak, the ones who never woke up. She looked up. I'll help, but only if my name stays on it forever. It will, Nadine said, that night. Elias stood outside the terminal again, this time with the wind at his back. He felt something shift, not relief, but motion. The kind of motion that only comes when you force something bigger than yourself to listen. Inside, Camille started writing her section of the Rhodes Resolution. The first line read, I was not a risk, I was a person. Camille Rhodes didn't look like someone preparing to shake a system. She was wearing oversized sweats, hair tied back in a frizzy bun, a medical bracelet still clasped around her wrist. She sat cross-legged on the edge of her hospital bed, chewing the end of a pencil while rereading her opening paragraph. I was not a risk. I was a person. The simplicity of it almost scared her. Would they listen? Or would they trim her words down to something softer, more comfortable, across the room? Marina scrolled through an email thread from Solstice Airlines' legal team. The tone was cautious, corporate, lined with phrases like mutual benefit and collaborative opportunity. Elias paced. He hadn't slept properly in 2 days. There were no wounds to stitch, no vitals to monitor, but the emotional hemorrhaging his own. Camille's was relentless. Marina finally broke the silence. They're trying to settle without admitting guilt. Elias stopped pacing. Of course they are. They want the optics, not the responsibility. Marina looked over. So we don't sign. Camille spoke softly. We don't sign until they say it. Say what Elias asked. That I mattered, she said. That what happened to me wasn't a miscommunication or an unfortunate mistake. It was a choice, and it almost cost me my life. Outside the hospital room, media vans began lining up. The press had learned about Camille's upcoming meeting with Solstice. And somewhere in that swarm was someone who noticed everything. Malcolm Everett sat in a black Lincoln Town car, watching from behind tinted windows. His legal pad rested on one knee, a fresh espresso in hand. A civil rights attorney for over 30 years. He'd represented patients left to die in ER hallways, mothers forced to give birth handcuffed, black professionals handcuffed for looking suspicious. But this was different. This was a child. He stepped out of the car, adjusted his tie, and made his way into the hospital. Marina recognized him instantly. Mr. Everett, please. Call me Malcolm. May I? He gestured toward the empty seat near Camille. Camille nodded. He didn't ask for a rundown. He didn't need to. He'd already watched the footage, reviewed the flight transcripts, cross-referenced Solstice Airlines' internal training materials. Instead, he said this, what you survived, Camille, has the potential to change air travel policy across the country, but only if you're ready for a storm. Camille raised her eyebrows. Stronger than what I already went through. Malcolm gave a sad smile. In different ways. They'll dig up your school records, your medical history. Trolls will call you a liar. Some will say your father staged it. Elias's jaw tightened. Camille blinked, slowly. I didn't ask for any of this. No, Malcolm agreed, but you didn't walk away from it either. Camille stared at her hands. Finally, she looked up. What do we do first? Malcolm said. We get you a platform where you speak not the airline, not their PR team, you. Solstice Airlines was already trying to control the story. They'd hired an outside firm to generate positive press, interviews with longtime employees who valued diversity, statements that referenced Camille only in abstract terms, but none of it mattered now. Because that afternoon, Camille walked into a packed auditorium at Rainier Institute of Neuroscience flanked by her parents, Malcolm Everett and Nadine Ross, and stood at the podium. The audience quieted. Even the cameras stopped clicking. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She read from a sheet of paper with trembling hands, but steady tone. When I boarded Flight 732, I carried my medication in a pouch my mom embroidered with my name. It's not dangerous. It's not narcotic. It's mine. The flight attendant who threw it away never asked me what it was. She didn't speak to me directly. She looked at me and saw a problem. Not a girl, not a patient, not a person. She didn't just take my medication. She took my breath. And when I collapsed, they treated my father like he was overreacting. He wasn't. He saved my life. Again. But I shouldn't have needed saving. When Camille finished, the room sat in stunned silence. The first person to stand was Joelle Lynn, then another, Then everyone, outside, Twitter exploded. Camille's speech was uploaded in full, unedited. Celebrities reshared it. Civil rights organizations reached out. Meanwhile, in Solstice Airlines' executive office, Nicholas Vane looked at the metrics. Engagements through the roof, his assistant said, but it's not going the way we wanted. Nicholas leaned back, rubbing his temple. It's never gone the way we wanted. Not since she spoke. Margot Lively, the flight attendant who triggered everything, was now under formal investigation. But privately, Solstice executives were debating whether to scapegoat her entirely or accept broader blame. And then came the subpoena. Malcolm Everett filed a civil rights lawsuit on behalf of Camille Rhodes. The charges were clear: medical negligence, racial discrimination, failure to follow emergency protocol, emotional distress. The airline board panicked. Do we fight? One member asked. Nicholas shook his head. We negotiate publicly. They made an offer $10 million in damages, immediate policy changes, full funding of the Rhodes resolution, but only if the Rhodes family agreed to a non-disclosure clause. Camille said no, not because of pride, not because she wanted more, but because silence wasn't healing, it was suffocating. Elias watched her, marveled at how she carried herself. There was pain behind her eyes, but she didn't flinch any more. That night, Marina stood at the window of their hotel room and whispered, I didn't know she had this in her. Elias joined her, voice low. She got it from you. They watched the city lights blink. Somewhere out there, people were rewriting training manuals, shredding old protocols, learning to say her name. But in the morning, Camille would wake up to another storm, because Margot Lively had just spoken to the press for the first time, and she wasn't sorry. The interview began with a shot of Margot Lively seated in a soft leather chair, backlit by morning sunlight pouring through the studio windows. Her gray uniform jacket was neatly pressed, wings still pinned over her left pocket, hair pulled tight in a bun as if clinging to discipline itself. I'm not a villain, she said quietly. I'm a rule follower. That's all I've ever been. The host, a polished man with perfectly parted hair and an empathetic tone, leaned forward. Then what happened? On Flight 732. Margot inhaled slowly. What happened was a perfect storm of policy confusion, emotional escalation, and miscommunication. I wasn't told the girl had a medical condition. I saw an unlabeled container and followed procedure. He nodded. And the medication. There are TSA regulations. Items must be labeled. Proper documentation must be provided. I didn't receive any of that. What the viewers didn't know was that Camille's medication had been labeled, that it was in a clear pouch embroidered with her name, that Margot never asked her a single question before throwing it out. But Margot didn't mention that. What she did mention was her decades of service, her annual awards, the time she'd handled a cardiac arrest midair, the time she'd comforted a sobbing toddler for 4 hours straight. All of it true, all of it irrelevant to what had happened that day. The host gently probed. You've heard Camille's speech. She says she was profiled, that you saw her as a threat. Margot's face flickered. Just for a second. I don't see race when I work. I see passengers, safety, rules, and if you had to do it all again. Another pause, longer this time. I'd still follow the book, but maybe I'd ask a few more questions first. The interview aired that evening. Within 20 minutes, it had been clipped, shared, dissected, and flooded with comments. She doesn't see race. That's privilege talking. She never even acknowledged Camille by name. She just made herself the victim, but some defended her. She did her job. It's the system that failed. Don't crucify one woman for decades of bad training. She's not the problem. The handbook is. Meanwhile, in the Rhodes hotel room, Camille watched the interview in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply said, "She still doesn't see me." Elias turned off the TV. "She's not the one we need to change anymore. But she is the face," Marina said. "People are choosing sides, not truths." Outside, protesters had gathered in front of Solstice Airlines headquarters. Some held signs with Camille's name, others with Margot's, and in between, placards that read, "Fix the skies, and we deserve to breathe." Malcolm Everett watched it all unfold from his office. "The court of public opinion is loud," he said, "but unpredictable." He wasn't wrong, because Solstice Airlines, in a panicked attempt to steady their image, announced that they were suspending Margot Lively indefinitely without pay pending an internal review. The backlash was immediate and came from both directions. Margot's supporters launched a campaign called Protect the Crew, arguing that she was being scapegoated to shield the airline's broken policies. Camille's supporters responded with Justice for Camille, demanding that systemic reform wasn't just about firing one woman. It was about changing every layer that allowed her decision to happen. Caught in the middle were Camille and her family, and it was taking a toll. Camille began having migraines again. Her appetite disappeared. She deleted every social media app from her phone and turned off notifications. One morning, she woke up to find her face on the cover of a national magazine. The headline read, "Symbol or Survivor? The teen at the heart of a turbulent debate." She felt hollow, like she'd been converted into a metaphor. "Do they even know who I am?" She asked Elias one night. "You're not a metaphor," he said. "You're my daughter. You're a person. But maybe that's not enough," she whispered. Elias paused. "Then let's make them remember." That's when Elias reached out to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Dr. Anthea Browning, a medical ethics professor who ran a national advisory board for patient advocacy. When she arrived at their hotel suite 2 days later, Camille didn't recognize the woman in the sleek black pantsuit and rainbow pins. But the moment Dr. Browning sat beside her and said, "I've read every page of your chart, and I'm furious," Camille smiled for the first time in days. "Dr." Browning offered something new a seat at the table. "Solstice Airlines doesn't just need to apologize. They need to rebuild. And I want you, Camille, to help write their new medical emergency response training." Camille blinked. "You want me to? What designed the chapter?" "Dr." Browning said. "That would have saved your life without your father needing to scream." Camille's hands trembled. "You don't have to," Marina said gently. But Camille looked at Dr. Browning and said, "I want to." And so began the process of drafting what would later become known as the Camille Protocol, a new standard that required all medications to be assessed by both visual and verbal verification, especially when involving minors. Passengers with known medical conditions to be tagged for medical deference, not suspicion. Mandatory racial bias training with quarterly renewals for all Solstice staff. It was exhausting work. Each clause brought memories. Each example felt like reliving the flight. But Camille persisted, and in the background, Malcolm Everett continued preparing for the lawsuit. He built a case not on outrage, but on law, on precedent, on evidence that could not be spun or softened. He deposed executives. He pulled internal memos. He traced every complaint Solstice had buried over the past decade. And then, in one email from 2018, he found a training manager who had warned, "We're treating perception as policy." One day, It'll cost a life. It hadn't. Not quite. But it had come close. At the next press conference. Malcolm stood beside Camille and read that email aloud. The room erupted. Reporters swarmed Solstice's legal team. Congressional representatives called for transportation hearings. Camille's voice had become thunder. And through it all, Margot Lively remained quiet. Until one morning, Camille received a letter. It was handwritten, no return address. It read, "I followed the book. But the book wasn't written for girls like you. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand. I hope you rewrite it. L." Camille folded the note gently, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a symbol. She felt like someone who'd been heard. The conference room at Solstice Airlines headquarters had never felt colder. Rows of executives lined the curved walnut table, each with a company-issued notepad and glass bottle of sparkling water in front of them. A massive projection screen behind them displayed the words in bold Proposed Medical Deference Protocol, Phase 1. Camille Rhodes stood at the front, 17 years old, thin, tired, wearing a cream sweater over gray slacks that didn't quite reach her ankles. Her curls framed her face like a halo, but her eyes held no softness, only steel. Next to her stood Dr. Anthea Browning, silent and steady. Camille took a breath. "I'm not here to make anyone feel comfortable." She began, "I'm here so no one else has to feel what I felt: panic, shame, invisibility at 36,000 feet. A silence rippled through the room. Not tension, not defiance, just the discomfort of having to listen. She clicked the remote. Slide 1. Identifying risk without assumption. This is the part where your crew learns to ask before assuming, where they learn the difference between a threat and a diagnosis, where they learn that a teenager clutching an ice pack is not a danger, but possibly in pain. She clicked again. Slide 2, verbal verification over visual prejudice. Camille. One executive started, voice tight. These terms might alienate some of our more senior team members. She didn't blink. Good. Let them be alienated until they understand. Doctor. Browning smiled faintly. Elias sat in the back row, hands folded. Marina, beside him, kept her hand on his knee. This moment wasn't just a presentation. It was a reckoning, a reclamation, a daughter rewriting what should have protected her. Camille continued, unwavering. The protocol includes mandatory onboarding simulations, not just on CPR and evacuation, but bias recognition, disability accommodation, and medical escalation hierarchy. It ensures that no one, no matter their skin, their speech, or their seat, gets treated like a hazard. Another slide. Crew accountability flowchart. This will require union negotiation. A VP muttered, then negotiate, Camille said simply. Doctor. Browning spoke up for the first time. Let me be clear, this is not optional. If Solstice wants to avoid further legal action, these reforms are your lifeline. Another executive raised a hand. But what about crew discretion? Aren't we creating a situation where every judgment call is second-guessed? Camille met his eyes. Some judgment calls deserve to be second-guessed. I was one of them. For the next hour, she walked them through every clause, every example. She used her own flight as the central case study. Each step brought them closer to a future that felt less suffocating, less silent, less deadly. When she finished, the room was quiet. Not everyone clapped, but no one interrupted. The Solstice CEO, a man named Darren Wall, finally spoke. I want to thank Ms. Rhodes for her bravery. We're going to review this document line by line and begin integration next quarter. Camille nodded. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. This wasn't about applause. It was about infrastructure. Back at the hotel, Camille collapsed onto the bed. "I've never talked that long in my life," she murmured into a pillow. Elias laughed gently. "You talked like you've been doing it for years. I feel like I aged 5 of them today." "Good. That means it mattered." Marina brought over a mug of hot chamomile tea. "You made them listen. But now comes the harder part." Camille sat up, eyes questioning, getting people to care. "No," Marina said softly, getting them to change. That night, Camille scrolled through the messages in her inbox. Thousands. From patients, doctors, parents, flight attendants, teachers, even children. One message stood out. It read, "My name's Alyssa. I'm 10. I have epilepsy. You made me feel less weird." Camille smiled for the first time in 2 days, and then her phone buzzed again. It was a news alert. Former flight attendant Margot Lively declines public hearing. Issues statement through attorney. Curious. Camille clicked. The statement was brief. "I stand by my training. I regret the pain caused. But I am not the system. I am its product." Camille stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't feel angry. She felt tired. Why does she keep trying to explain it away? She finally asked Elias, because if she admits it fully, she has to admit she broke something she thought was sacred. Like the rules. No. Like herself. They didn't talk more that night. But Camille thought about it long after the lights were out. About what people hold sacred. Their pride, their structure, their stories, and how hard it is to rebuild when those things collapse. A week later, Solstice Airlines held their first public forum on reform. This time, the room was filled not with suits, but with people. Flight crews, ground staff, disability advocates, journalists, passengers, and in the center, Camille, seated behind a white table, facing them all. The moderator welcomed her. "Ms. Rhodes has graciously agreed to speak, not as a plaintiff, but as a partner in progress. Camille, the floor is yours." She stood. "I want to tell you a story," she said. "It's not dramatic. It's not political. It's just human." And then, for the first time, she told the full story of Flight 732, from boarding to the ice pack to the moment her lungs started to fail. She spoke of Margot's voice, of the silence in the cabin, of her father's eyes when he realized she might die. And she ended with this, "My story isn't rare. What's rare is that you're listening. Please don't waste it." The room was quiet, but when she returned to her seat, a flight attendant stood up, an older black man with silver hair and eyes full of regret. "My name is George Mason. I've worked 34 years for Solstice, and I want to say this on behalf of everyone who's been quiet too long. I'm sorry." Camille nodded. Another hand rose, then another, and another. Voices began to fill the room, not with excuses, but with accountability. That night, the Rhodes family walked back to their hotel through a quiet downtown street lit by amber lamps. Camille looped her arms through her parents. "Today felt different," she said. "It was," Elias replied. "You think they'll actually follow through?" "Some will. Some won't. And the ones who don't." Camille looked up at the stars. "Then we remind them why they have to." Camille woke to her phone buzzing with notifications. At first, she thought it was more support messages. Maybe another school asking her to speak. Maybe another nonprofit inviting her to partner. But when she unlocked the screen, the mood shifted instantly. The headlines were everywhere. "Teen overreacts on flight, endangers passengers." Solstice CEO faces backlash for caving to woke pressure. Medical incident or political theater. She sat up, her stomach hollow. Marina noticed first. Camille, she asked from the doorway. Camille handed over the phone. As Marina scrolled, her expression tightened. "They're twisting it," she said. Elias was already brewing coffee. He didn't need to see the headlines. He'd seen it happen before, in medical journals, in boardrooms, in life. This was coming, he said simply. The pushback always does. That day, Camille's story trended for the wrong reasons. A popular morning talk show host questioned her emotional stability for speaking in front of a corporate board. A retired flight crew member called her a dramatized liability. One tabloid even pulled an old yearbook photo, labeling her attention-seeking. It didn't matter that the truth was documented, that her vitals had plummeted, that a paramedic had to stabilize her on the tarmac. Narratives had been set in motion, and some people just couldn't handle the thought that a young black girl had authority over an entire airline's policy. Joelle Lynn called mid-morning. "Don't read the comments," she said immediately. "Too late," Camille whispered, her voice dry. Joelle sighed. "We're putting together a response video. Not just you, everyone. Witnesses, doctors, even that guy from row 12. The lawyer, Malcolm, he's doing it. Already recorded. Said he'd sue anyone who misrepresents what he saw." Camille let her head fall against the couch cushion. "I didn't want this to become war." Joelle paused. "Camille, change always looks like war to people who benefit from silence." By noon, Solstice Airlines issued a lukewarm statement. "We are aware of the ongoing public discussion and continue to evaluate all feedback with care and neutrality." Neutrality. Camille reread the word 3 times. "That's their way of saying they're scared," Elias said, "or stalling." Marina added. The phone rang again. This time, it was Dr. Anthea Browning. "They want to delay the protocol rollout," she said without preamble. Camille felt her spine straighten. Why board tension, investor worry, PR backlash, usual suspects? But we had an agreement. We had a promise. They're treating it like a suggestion. That evening, Camille stared at the folder on her laptop labeled MV Protocol. All that work, all those hours, the diagrams, the training flowcharts, the testimonies, and now, hesitation. She turned to Elias. "Do you think I made it worse?" He looked at her for a long moment. "No, but I think you made it real. And some people can't handle real." Camille stood. "I want to go to the forum tomorrow, the one for disability and medical rights." "Are you sure?" Marina asked gently. Camille nodded. "If they're going to come after my story, then I'm going to tell it louder." The next day, the community center buzzed with low conversations and paper coffee cups. Camille stepped to the mic during the second panel, hands shaking slightly. "I'm not a professional speaker," she began. "I'm just someone who almost didn't get to speak at all because someone threw my medicine away at 36,000 feet. People listened, not with pity, but with recognition. I was called dramatic." She continued. "I was called unstable. That's what happens when you speak too clearly about your pain. It makes people uncomfortable, but comfort doesn't save lives." Applause broke out, soft at first, then stronger. A woman in the front row raised her hand. She had a visible tremor in her right arm. "I'm sorry they're doing this to you," she said. "They did it to me, too. Not on a plane, but in a courtroom. Same erasure, same blame." After the panel, a young flight attendant approached. "I work for Solstice," he whispered, "and I want to help." but they're pressuring staff not to speak out, threatening reassignments. Camille's chest tightened. You're scared. Yeah. She touched his arm gently. Me too. They exchanged numbers. Back at the hotel, Camille wrote a blog post. Simple, direct, honest, titled What It Feels Like to Be Discredited for Telling the Truth. Within 12 hours, it was read over 600,000 times. That night, the Rhodes family sat together, cross-legged on the bed, reading emails aloud. From a mother whose son has a feeding tube. From a teacher who collapsed on a bus and no one believed her until it was almost too late. From a retired paramedic who said he's seen this kind of bias cost lives. Camille leaned back. It's bigger than me now, she said softly. Elias nodded. It always was. You just lit the flare. But the next morning, the real blow came. Doctor, Browning called again. They want to replace your name on the protocol. Camille blinked. What? They're rebranding it, calling it the Passenger Medical Sensitivity Framework. They're removing my name. They said it makes it less polarizing. For a moment, Camille couldn't breathe. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about credit. It was about being erased. Again. Elias watched his daughter's face harden. Set a meeting, she said. Face to face. I want to look them in the eye when I ask them why my life is too uncomfortable for their paperwork. Marina gripped her hand. We go together. Camille met her eyes. No, this one I need to do alone. The boardroom at Solstice Airlines headquarters was built like a monument to calm. Frosted glass, sound-dampened panels, a bowl of imported fruit no one ever touched. But that morning, it felt more like a surgical theater, sterile and bracing, with Camille Rhodes at its center. She wore a navy blue blazer, the kind her mother said made her look like she belonged behind podiums. Her braids were tied back simply, her eyes steady. She had spent the night rehearsing. But now, standing before 9 suited executives, she knew she wouldn't use a script. Dr. Anthea Browning was seated toward the back, like moral support tucked into the architecture. The chair of the board, Alan Winslow, adjusted his tie when Camille entered. He smiled as if greeting a guest. Not a storm. Ms. Rhodes, thank you for joining us. Camille didn't smile. You're removing my name from the protocol. It's not personal, said a woman in a burgundy blouse. Her voice clipped. It's strategic. Camille turned her gaze on her. Strategic erasure. No. It's the woman paused, searching for a softer word. Reframing. Why? Camille asked. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable landed like a question mark pressed to their necks. A different executive chimed in, clearing his throat. There's been, understandably, some division. Public sentiment is strong, but not unified. Some see the name as politicized. I see, Camille said, folding her arms. You'll keep the framework. You'll keep the procedures. You'll keep the language I wrote, but not the name of the girl whose near death made you write it down in the first place. The room was silent. Anthea looked up from her notepad, her jaw tight. You're asking me to let this be absorbed, Camille continued, to let my story become a blank blueprint, to disappear into the systems you claim to be fixing. We're not saying that, Alan replied. More defensive now. We're trying to move forward responsibly. Responsibly, Camille repeated. My name makes people uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, but because it reminds them they let a child almost die over their bias. You don't want to carry that weight, but I carry it every day. Another executive, an older woman with silver curls, leaned forward. Ms. Rhodes, she said gently, you are extraordinary. But this company has to serve a global audience. It has to think beyond one story. Camille looked at her directly. Then maybe you should have thought beyond one story before my lungs collapsed at 36,000 feet. The silver-haired woman leaned back, chastened. Camille took a breath. The weight of the room pressed on her, but it couldn't bury her. I didn't ask for this, she said. I didn't wake up hoping to be a symbol. But you made me one when you threw my medicine away and tried to pretend it was protocol. Her voice cracked, just for a second, but she held her ground. If you're going to build something real, something that actually protects people, then name it what it was. Call it the Maya Vance Protocol. Call it the Rhodes Standard. Call it the truth. But don't whitewash it into another faceless policy designed to protect you more than me. Anthea sat straighter, her eyes glistening. Alan looked at the rest of the board, uncertain now. Camille turned toward the door, but before she left, she said one last thing. You can keep the fruit bowl, but you're not taking my name. That night, the company issued a revised statement. The protocol would retain its original designation, the Rhodes Protocol, and Camille would be credited as its principal architect. Joelle texted 5 words. That's what justice sounds like, but Camille didn't smile. She was too tired, too wrung out from a battle that had never been just hers. She walked through the Seattle rain later that evening, without an umbrella, letting the cold water sting her skin. She wasn't thinking about interviews or appearances. She was thinking about breath, about how thin it had become on that plane, about how the world had tried to make her story smaller than it was. A woman stopped her near the intersection. "Are you Camille?" she asked. Camille nodded. The woman, maybe in her 50s, reached out with a trembling hand. "My daughter has lupus," she said. "Last year, a teacher accused her of faking a flare-up. She cried herself to sleep for a week, until she saw your speech. You changed something in her, in us." Camille looked at her. The woman's eyes were tired, but full. "I'm so sorry your daughter went through that," Camille said softly. "She's stronger now." The woman smiled. "Because you were visible." Camille took a deep breath, rain curling around her chin. "Thank you for telling me. At home." Marina had made her chamomile tea. Elias was reading an article about emergency response reform in the Atlantic. He had underlined every mention of the Rhodes Protocol. "You're being cited in clinical journals," he said, holding up the page, "as a case study." Camille set down her bag. "They used to call me dramatic. Now they call me precedent." Elias looked over the rim of his glasses. The world takes a while to catch up to the truth. Later that night, Camille lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about what came next. The story wasn't over, because somewhere, another child was boarding a flight with medicine in her backpack. Somewhere, a parent was praying the flight crew wouldn't see their daughter as a risk instead of a person. And somewhere, someone who once said nothing was beginning to speak. Camille Rhodes stood at the jet bridge again. 1 year to the day since the flight that changed everything. She was flying alone this time. No Marina holding her hand. No Elias clutching her backpack with quiet dread. Just Camille, 18 now, legal adult, eyes steady, in her carry-on. She kept her inhaler and EpiPen in a clear pouch marked with a bold sticker, medically necessary. Do not remove. The airline still solstice. She had thought about switching. She had been offered a private jet. But she wanted to see it through, to sit in a regular seat, among regular passengers, and let her breath be hers again, at the gate. A young agent scanned her ticket and paused. "Ms.
Rhodes?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, but firm. "We've been told to personally confirm your safety kit is with you and marked. Do you mind Camille unzipped the pouch, holding it out?" The agent smiled. "Excellent. Thank you for everything you've done." Camille blinked. "I'm sorry, I have Crohn's," the agent said softly. "Had to hide my meds on flights before. Not anymore. The Rhodes protocol changed that." Camille nodded, unsure what to say. Her throat tightened. "Have a safe flight," the agent said, then added in a whisper, "You helped more than you know." Camille stepped onto the plane. Her seat was 14A, window. She settled in slowly, palms pressed to the armrest, breathing in the familiar scent of fabric and recirculated air. A flight attendant came by, noticed her name on the manifest, and crouched beside her. "Ms. Rhodes," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you. We trained on your case. I'm the new disability liaison on board. It's my job to ensure all passengers with medical needs are protected and supported." Camille's breath caught. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The woman handed her a card that read, "On this flight, you are seen. If you need anything, you are heard. If anyone questions your safety, I will stand beside you." That was the entire card. No legalese, no signature. Just a quiet promise, printed on soft cream cardstock. The flight took off on time. No turbulence, no hostility. The clouds looked like stretched silk outside her window. Camille rested her head back and closed her eyes. For the first time in a year, she did not flinch when the food cart rolled past. She didn't clutch her bag when the attendant offered water. She simply existed. At cruising altitude, the captain's voice came through the intercom. "Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome aboard Solstice Airlines Flight 318 to Washington, D.C. This is your captain, Marisol Vega. I just want to note that today, we are operating under the Rhodes Protocol, which ensures that all medically necessary equipment and medications remain with their passengers at all times. A small but vital change made possible by the courage of one young traveler who reminded us all to listen better." Several passengers turned their heads, looking toward 14A. Camille blinked at the window, heat flooding her cheeks. An older woman across the aisle leaned over. "You're her, aren't you?" Camille smiled a little. "I guess so." The woman nodded. "My grandson has type 1 diabetes. You made flying feel possible again." Camille looked down, blinking fast. "Thank you." The woman didn't push. She simply smiled, then turned back to her magazine. At 36,000 feet, Camille let herself feel the altitude this time, not as a threat, but as a place of clarity. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, then reached into her bag and pulled out her journal. On the first page, she wrote, "I'm flying again, and this time, I'm not afraid." She turned the page. They tried to erase me. Instead, they named the sky after me. When they landed in D.C., a small group waited at the gate. Members of the National Youth Advocacy Council, a representative from the FAA, a journalist from a disability rights magazine. But the first person she saw was Joelle Lynn. "You made it," Joelle said, throwing her arms around her. "You knew I'd come." Joelle grinned. "Actually, I worried you'd parachute out halfway just to make a point." They laughed. Camille stepped forward to the cameras and questions. This time, she didn't hide behind her blazer or practiced words. She told them about the girl who had whispered to her at a panel, the mother in the rain, the agent at the gate. She didn't speak like someone performing bravery.
She spoke like someone who had survived and decided to stay visible. That evening, Camille and her parents stood on the rooftop of a modest hotel overlooking the city. Below them, monuments shone white in the floodlights. "I keep waiting for it to feel like enough," Camille said, "for the world to change. But sometimes I feel like I'm just one voice in a loud, messy crowd." "You are," Elias said, sipping his tea. "But sometimes that one voice is a tuning fork." Camille turned to him. "You know," Marina added, "when you were 5, you were afraid of elevators. You'd cry every time the doors closed." "I remember," Camille said. "But then one day," Marina continued, "you stood in front of a hotel elevator, clenched your fists, and said, 'I'll ride it, even if I have to cry the whole time.'" Camille smiled. "Sounds like me." Elias looked at his daughter, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You're still riding," he said, "and some of us are following you because we finally know it's safe." Camille looked out over the horizon, city lights blinking like data points of hope. She didn't know what would come next. There would be more backlash, more panels, more emails from scared teenagers and grateful mothers. There would be days she doubted herself, days the sky felt too heavy again. But tonight, she knew one thing. She had reclaimed altitude, and nothing, not protocol revisions, not public scrutiny, not fear could take that from her again. Because her story was not just about the flight that went wrong. It was about the girl who made it right. Maya's story is more than a single flight or a lost medication. It's a powerful reminder of the human cost when prejudice takes flight unchecked. In the face of cold dismissal and reckless discrimination, a family's quiet strength and unwavering courage became a beacon for change. Their journey teaches us to look beyond the surface, to challenge assumptions, and to demand accountability wherever injustice tries to hide. As we close this chapter, let us remember the weight of empathy and respect in every encounter, especially in moments where power feels uneven. This story is a call to action for us all to stand firm against discrimination, to amplify the voices silenced by bias, and to transform pain into progress. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep these vital conversations alive and inspire more stories of resilience and justice. Stay with us for the next video, where we'll continue to uncover the real stories behind the headlines and remind the world that every life deserves dignity